Hello, and welcome to episode 34 of Peace Matters, a podcast on contemporary geopolitics and international relations. My name is George Leoka. I am the project assistant at the International Institute for Peace. In this episode, we will discuss the Horn of Africa with an emphasis more on Ethiopia. How have civil conflicts spilled over the entirety of the region, and has the international response to that fallen short? This and more will be discussed shortly. My guest will be Moges Zewdu Teshome. He is a PhD candidate at the Vienna School of International Studies. He is also the host of A Buffet of Ideas, another podcast. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We had the recent General Assembly at the UN where Trump made the claim that he's actually ended 7 wars, and one of them being Ethiopia and Egypt. That made me very interested to kind of know specifically what's been happening between the two countries. I had not heard about this before doing this research per se. And something that he actually said, which I feel the need to kind of read it out loud because I cannot, do his words justice, if you will. I think the United States is funding the dam, being the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. I do not know why they did not solve it before building it, but it's nice when the Nile River has water. It's a very important source of income in life, he says. It is the life of Egypt, and to take that away is pretty incredible. But we think that we're going to solve it very quickly. Has the situation been solved? We're jumping straight into it.
Yeah, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you again, and it's great to be back at the IIP. This guy, the President of the United States of America, Mr. Trump, is known for making a lot of claims and unfounded assertions, and this is one of them for me. So. The situation has not been changed or improved, but just let's jump into what he said. So there are 3 important things in that quote you just read. Mm-hmm. And first of all, he said that Ethiopia is taking away the lifeline of Egypt. And that's not true. We are not taking away any water. The water is still flowing.
Can you first, I think, we can first start by explaining what the dam is, and then we can go on that as well. I think that would make a bit,
So the GERD, or the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, has commenced 40 years ago in March of 2011. It was planned and funded by the Ethiopians, and it took more than 14 years now. It's finally completed and officially inaugurated on, 14th of September, a week ago or 10 days ago. So it has caused a lot of controversies, inevitably, because Egypt has always been against any project to be built on the Blue Nile, or we call it Abai, in Ethiopia. And that led to different accusations and bilateral meetings, trilateral discussions, and of course some attempts to mediate between the 3 parties, but mainly between Egypt and Ethiopia. And Trump was also involved in the mediation, one of the mediation efforts which took place in early 2020, and which finally didn't work. So that is the state of GERD. And coming back to what he claimed, and first of all, there have never been any active conflict or war because of the water. And so there is nothing to stop from the side of the international community or the United States. And second of all, it is a hydropower. Okay, it's a hydropower, it's a clean energy. It's not arresting the natural flow of the water. And the water both in Aswan and the Rosaire Dam in Sudan are the same. The volume is not decreasing. And there is no significant harm which has been caused because of the construction of the dam. And that is out there, and everybody can see and judge it. And finally, he also claimed that he's going to stop it soon. And I don't think that a third-party involvement particularly Trump, is going to resolve the issue rather than exacerbating it.
But something else that I found very interesting is, and we were speaking about this before we started recording, there's also this like national pride when it comes to the GERD. I was mostly curious to know a little bit more about what that entails. Why are Ethiopians themselves, why do they correspond this construction, if you will, or infrastructure with national unity?
Yeah, so thank you for raising that point, because the GERD means a lot for Ethiopians. At least it means three things. First of all, as you have rightly mentioned, it is a national pride. It's a national symbol. It's a national symbol probably which is more potent than even the national flag or anthem, around which the Ethiopian people and the friends of Ethiopia can rally. First of all, it is a national symbol. It could be used as a nation-building tool. So it is a national pride because everybody has been participating in the completion of GERD, including myself personally or my family. Everyone you talk to will tell you that. I would like to quote a line from the BBC report, actually. It reads like this. It says, Ethiopians may not agree on how to eat injera, our national food, but they say they definitely agree on the importance of the GERD. And that tells you everything. And the second is also the a reclamation of sovereignty. Our sovereignty over our water, natural resources, of course, without affecting, significantly affecting the interests of other downstream countries. And third, and very important, is also can be used as a source of fueling our economy. It provides clean energy, and more than 60% of Ethiopians do not have access to electricity. Just imagine that. While more than 96% of Egyptians have access to electricity. So I could say it has a political, social, and economic significance for Ethiopians and even for the people in the region.
And it's very interesting as we're talking about just sort of like the, I guess, celebration of the sovereignty of Ethiopia. It comes to show that, in fact, you guys were going through an economic uprise very quickly, double digits percentage even. And your current prime minister actually was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize due to him actually ending, or rather facilitating the end of the Eritrea Tigray war, actually. And I'm very curious to kind of get your perspective. Since we already jumped into the GERD situation, I think it would make more sense if we also discuss an overall view of how you perceive what actually happened. How come Ethiopia became from such a rising power in the region to now a source of conflict in many different ways?
Yeah, for an external observer, it looks that the Ethiopia of 2018, 2019, and the Ethiopia of 2025, as we speak, is totally different, as if they are two different countries. But that is only when you see it from the outside, without understanding or unpacking the dynamics, the socio-political dynamics within the country. It's quite unfortunate that from being one of the promising nations in the Horn of Africa, where the international community were praising the reform, and the Prime Minister won the Nobel Peace Prizes partly because of the domestic liberalization of the politics, and many thought, and rightly so, that Ethiopia was entering a new era of democratization and democratic consolidation, and of course, peace with its neighbors. And that was short-lived. So we can highlight probably three reasons for that, three factors. The first one is the structural causes, structural reasons, which most observers or analysts overlook. One of the structural factors is that there has been a growing nationalism, competing nationalism, ethno-nationalism, which is manifesting, and we'll talk about it, and how we ended up in war and then militant uprising. So that nationalism and somehow a tainted nation-building process was there and somehow suppressed. Two, we have had, and still having it, we are back to it in a different form and shape, that culture of authoritarianism, dictatorship for more than 50 years. So right before the coming to power of the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who was actually part of the ancient regime, we have been ruled by a ruthless authoritarian party or regime. And that itself somehow affected the process of transition itself, because that is a political culture. And third, there was a mismanaged transition. So this mismanaged transition in the sense that there was an opening up and a kind of liberalization without having alternative institutions in place. We don't have a resilient and robust institutions which can withstand storms. And then we have the Abiy factor finally. Abiy as a leader, Abiy as an individual, a new person, a new persona, who is uses more nationalistic rhetoric and full of contradictions and domestic and foreign policy contradictions. And then even the rapprochement, finally, the rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea was not institutionalized. It was a personalized politics. So Abiy wanted to personalize politics to this day by sidelining the institutions. And even that very peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia was not institutionalized. And as we observed later on, it was used as a war pact. As you can see, Eritrea participated in the Tigray War, or the war in the northern part of Ethiopia. So there are a number of reasons for that. But generally,
would you say that all of that stems from this, because you were speaking on the nationalistic perspectives on this, would you say that all of this is also relevant on how the Prime Minister has also become a populist figure as well? Like, would you say that populism is also in the rise in Ethiopia? I mean, we can draw the comparison also here in Europe with where leaders have become more and more personalized or more idolized even. Would you say that that also is the case in Ethiopia at the moment? Or is there an uprise from the civilians, the community? You see that there's a couple of civil conflicts that are currently happening in Ethiopia. You have Amhara, you have Oromia. These are basically civil communities that have journalists or educators or people kicked out, displaced. How is this being excused?
There is no excuse whatsoever for this. And but first of all, that you raised a very important point with regard to the modus operandi of Prime Minister, of whether he's a populist or not. He is, but a different variant. I call him a performative populist. A performative populist, we have these modern leaders who focuses on specific episodes and performing on the stage and using media and social media. And probably you can see that with other leaders, even in Europe, somehow, with Orban and Erdogan in Turkey to some extent. Yes, he is populist, but of a different nature, who focuses on the daily machinations of politics. Yes, so he's populist, but of different
But would
nature.
you say that that is a driver between this civil conflicts, or would you say that there is perhaps a different reason? My question was mostly on how the population of Ethiopia overall perceives these ongoing domestic issues.
Yeah, but I was getting to that because I just wanted to answer the other question before forgetting. Yeah, because so we have proliferation of civil wars, cycle of violence, and brutal civil wars. I would rather call it uncivil wars. It's not civil war anymore with that magnitude and nature.
Yeah.
And we have been mired in an uncivil civil war or conflict in the Oromia region, one of the largest region, both in terms of geography and population. That war has been going on for the last 6 years, and guess what? You don't see a lot of people talking about it or being reported. And then in between we had the Tigray civil war, a full-fledged civil war, which is extremely reported in terms of coverage. And somehow the international community and regional organizations had been also involved, and to some extent they have also succeeded in having a ceasefire. We'll talk about that. But the war...
To think that 5 million people were displaced, and
even more.
I believe the estimation of people who were murdered is around 600,000 as well.
Yeah, so you can't even put that in number. You see, those are only the reported one. Yeah. So there is a qualitative side to it. Mm-hmm. So now the 600,000 and who knows, those who are not counted or reported. So beyond the numbers, whether it is 600,000 or 6 million or 1 million, is that the level of brutality or barbarism, and probably it is in the nature of modern civil wars that 90%, I read that from CIPRI report, that since 1990, the vast majority of casualties are civilians in intra-state conflict. Probably that's one of the reasons. But in the Ethiopian context, it was so barbaric, so brutal, to the extent that the line between civilians and the combatants were lost, and all possible rules of engagement have been violated. So yes, millions, tens of thousands of people have been displaced year in and year out. A number of them have been killed, and violence against women, and using all tactics as a weapon of war. And that has been raging in Ethiopia, and not to mention that there is an active civil war which is going on in the Amhara region, even though it is to a lesser extent as compared to the Tigray civil war. It's still going on, and there's an active war more than 2 years. Now it is in its third year. It was started in 2023. Mm-hmm. So if you see the cycle, the one war was ended in November 2022, and then the other war was started in 2023, early 2023. And now we have another round of civil war. So generally, the cycle of violence has never ended in the Ethiopian political landscape over the last 5 or 6 years.
And how is the humanitarian aid coming in? Is there any? Is it underfunded? Is it limited?
I think it is both. It's a combination of both. There have been limited provision of humanitarian aid, much delayed, and in most cases after repeated calls by both international communities and domestic organizations and civil societies and individuals. I think, let me put it this way. These are the reasons for the underfunded or limited humanitarian provision and services. First of all, there are multifaceted crises going on in Ethiopia. Okay, so that compounded the problem. We have droughts, we have civil wars, and we have other crises. And the second reason is that security concern is widespread. Because for humanitarian aids to reach the needy on time, without delay, then you need to have an access to the regions, to the places. And that access has been restricted, both physically and in terms of information. So that security threat has been there. And the third reason, which is very also important and is common almost across the board, is what one could call a donor fatigue. So there is a fatigue in terms of the international community to provide, to contribute, because there are a lot of priorities somewhere else. And the issue of double standards also comes into the picture. just willfully ignoring some wars, because some conflicts are more important than others. Some lives are more important than others, and some conflicts are forgotten, and they are forgotten with huge consequences.
And it's very interesting that you actually brought up the international community's fatigue on this, because I think it's worth to note that this we're only focusing, up until now, we focus on the domestic issues, and we've dabbled a little bit as to how that has spilled over the entirety of the Horn of Africa. But when we zoom out, I kind of want you to go through sort of the common threads that tie all the crises in the region all together. Could you list them for us?
Yeah, so one thing which we need to keep in mind as we speak about the Horn of Africa is that it is one of the most turbulent regions in the world. It has been, actually, not right now. We have a number of conflicts. Probably we'll talk about it in the future, even about Sudan and the civil war in Ethiopia and whatnot. But though, the Horn of Africa has been the hotspot of conflict, and there are different actors there. If you see it as a regional order, right? It is an open order where different players can leave their footprint. So we have state actors, non-state actors, a lot of them actually. Then we have the rising powers, or the emerging middle powers from the Middle East, most of them. Then also we have the geopolitical tensions and the competitions. So the Horn of Africa is an open region, an open order, regional order, which lacks a tight security architecture. That is one thing that we have to keep in mind. And that said, a war or conflict, or even a crisis, which happens in one country, does not necessarily stop there. And it has, and inevitably, it will have and spillover effects in the region.
And it's already had that, correct?
And
right?
it has already been happening in a different form. So some of those spillovers are cross-border insurgency cross-border insurgency that between Ethiopia and Sudan mostly, and Ethiopia and Somalia, somehow between Ethiopia and Kenya to a limited extent. So that cross-border insurgency is there. And then the other one, which is profound in nature, is the refugee crisis. It is the exodus. So we had the refugee from Ethiopia to Sudan, now from Sudan to Ethiopia, and then most of them are double or triple displaced now. And so they are constantly on the run, running away in pursuit of shelter and peace and tranquility somewhere. And then the third one is arms supply there, illicit arms being supplied by all kinds of actors in the Horn of Africa. So it is cheaper to get AKs than food these days.
Oh, wow.
So it's much cheaper because it can be provided on the illicit market. And the fact that now the border is open and there is no effective control, the government control.
I was going to ask about whether or not there would be any border tensions due to the refugee flow, but I guess not.
So far, so good in terms of having a tension just because of the refugee crisis. Mm-hmm. And it was mostly restricted to Sudan-Ethiopia border. Mm-hmm. So we have had refugees still there, and then the Sudanese refugees in Ethiopia actually coming all the way from Syria as well, because we are not talking about Syria and Yemen. Mm-hmm. We have refugees in Ethiopia from even Syria and Yemen.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because that is a Horn of Africa and open space. So there has been a refugee crisis, but that has never led to any border clash or open conflict between these two more countries.
So since we're talking about the spillover effect of Ethiopia's civil domestic issues and how those have spilled over its neighboring countries, I think it's very important to also ask about how the international response has been like. Given in mind that the AU, the African Union, is indeed headquartered in Ethiopia, you would assume that there would already be a very strict, rigid response from the AU. I'm curious to hear more about that, and also about whether or not the UN has responded. I know that there are some troops in the region as well, some special troops. I'm also curious to hear more about whether the EU has also engaged with what's been happening.
Just one correction: the troops are not in the Horn of Africa. There are some in the western. It used to be the Western Sahel region, but as I told you, that the Horn of Africa since Somalia in 1994, since that disaster, there has never been the UN or even African Union mandated troops other than the AMISOM, that is Somalia itself. So that said, the response of the international community has been far and in between. So if we see the international community in terms of the UN, as you said, the international, then the regional, and even sub-regional organizations such as IGAD. So they all have played a role, including some great powers, or those countries which wield soft powers such as Norway and even the United Kingdom have been involved to some extent, particularly in relation to the civil war in the northern part of Ethiopia, in bringing that civil war to an end. So there has been a success, a limited success in inducing the ceasefire between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front 3 years ago. And the AU has also played a significant role, not a significant role, some role, in terms of somehow de-escalating the tension between Ethiopia and Somalia last year with regard to the controversy which arose following the Ethiopia's signing of a memorandum of understanding with Somaliland. And IGAD has been actively involved in procuring the peace agreements. It was part of that mediation effort, and the United States was also there. So these days, the role of international institutions are getting minimal by the day, but great powers and regional powers and institutions all in concert trying to not prevent, in most cases, be it AU or the UN or any other organizations, are not effective in terms of preventing conflicts. But somehow,
what are they effective then?
Somehow, relatively speaking, they are effective in terms of bringing the conflicts to an end, even though after so many trials and at the expense of humanitarian disasters and human lives that you have mentioned earlier on. So there is a limited success, and there have been also challenges. And because the issue, so some of the reasons why the international organizations and the great powers have not been actively involved as they should are, first of all, because of the priorities. Okay, so geopolitics is a priority, so you have to do that balancing act. Then there is also the issue of double standard, which I just mentioned. The other issue is the rise of the transactional politics, where politics is more of bilateral and interest-based as opposed to multilateral engagement. So the Horn of Africa is a hotspot for geopolitical competitions. So that, to some extent, is understandable, but consequential.
On the flip side, what role have the Gulf states, China, Turkey had? Has it been any different from the West, if you will?
Yeah, so the coming of those actors from the Middle East and also China, even though China is not from the Middle East, but in having them in the mix has made the scene crowded. So the scene in the Horn of Africa is so crowded, so much so that you don't even know which party or which institution or which country is having what role. So in that regard, it is very, very much complicated. So their emergence has complicated the situation. So it has made it so difficult to resolve the issues because they bring their own interest, usually clandestine. And what is happening in Sudan possibly is it is more visible now. Those countries are meddling into the internal affairs.
Would you say that that's the biggest issue in terms of the international response being just the foreign meddling and therefore unrest, if you will? Is there no specific goal, perhaps, in mind?
Yeah, so they try to drag the conflict as much as they could so that they can benefit from it. Whether they do a deal on critical resource, critical minerals, and whether they are benefiting from arms supply, which is very important, or whether they are trying to have a geopolitical footprint there. Because for much of this country, Turkey 10 years ago, it was very difficult and they were not present. And now they are one of the biggest trading partners, even to Ethiopia. And more than that, they are also playing a cultural diplomacy through some institutions, some cultural institutions, including religious institutions, both in the Horn and beyond. So yes, they have been complicating, but all of them coming with their own baggage and national interest, which at times are hidden. And China particularly, so finally, China has been there at least for the last 2 decades by now, since late 2000. And it has been limited to 2 spheres. One, trade. So China has a very minimum involvement in ideological issues, but mostly trying to make the best out of the crisis or out of the engagement with Africa and in particular with Ethiopia. So trade is there. And the second one is even when there are crises, China usually tries to sit on the fence, almost always, and then jumps in, usually behind a closed door, trying to be a mediator and coming as a savior. So a bit of geopolitics and diplomacy, but mostly trade and what comes with it. So these are the scenes. I know it's not clean. It's so messy. It's just because of its nature. Now there are a lot of actors, even not to mention the other subnational actors which are operating in the Horn of Africa.
To wrap this conversation up, I think I'm very interested to hear your perspective on how you expect these 2 things to change in the next year based on how events have unraveled this past year. The domestic issues and the international response. How do you think those 2 will develop throughout the next year, given your perspective on everything that's been happening as of late?
Yeah, so it's a very difficult question because partly it is speculative. So I will provide what I consider to be most important things to watch in the coming years. At the domestic level, and I mean within Ethiopia itself, I will see the consolidation of the ceasefire if there is a will and active involvement of the international community. So consolidation of the existing ceasefire and perhaps some sort of negotiation between the government and warring parties in both Oromia and Amhara region, probably with the involvement of international community as a guarantor or as a mediator. That might happen in this coming year or so. But this is on the positive side. And then the Ethiopian economy will also somehow revive. It will recover in the coming years. But and also the social cohesion, which has been obliterated because of the civil war, it will heal slowly if national projects are prioritized And if we have, of course, the accountability framework, and if transitional justice framework, which is put in place, will be implemented, then these are the positives we can watch for. And of course, because we have now an ongoing NEDC National Dialogue Commission, so that national dialogue will take place after November, probably in the new year. So there will be a national dialogue, and out of it, there will be some concrete recommendations and measures. So these are the positive side. But then the negative aspect will be we will see more power consolidation, and so that means more authoritarianism. And I don't see any fair and free election in 2026, because in May 2026, just after 8 months, there will be election, a general election, and there is no free competition. There are no alternative parties. Journalists are muzzled, and some of them have been kicked out of the country, and political parties cannot freely express their program. So I won't expect a fair and free election, which means it is in favor of the incumbent, more of the same thing. Then the other one is that the crisis might continue, the political crisis and then the conflict, and a protracted civil war means that the economy will be bleeding, and the social cohesion will be the social fabric rather will be dismantled, and that makes it very difficult, even the project of rebuilding the nation and to even conduct the national dialogues that I just mentioned. So that is the second thing we have to watch out. The other important thing is the regionalization of the conflict. So there is a high tension between Ethiopia and Eritrea, which is going on, and there should be, and I think there are some steps being taken by the international community, and I mean diplomatic interventions, but there should be a massive diplomatic interventions before things go astray. And if the war starts between Ethiopia and Eritrea, that means all the domestic actors will be emboldened and the external actors will be involved. So the war won't be even between two parties. It's going to be a regional war. It will be a regionalized and even internationalized civil war, civil conflict. And that will make it very difficult, even more than the domestic and the conflicts. And of course, finally, the spillovers that we have talked about will only be exacerbated. And with that comes the issue of regional peace and the security being undermined. So these are some of the things that we have to watch out as we look ahead in the coming months or even year.
I like that you started out with the very optimistic takes of where Ethiopia could go in the coming years, and then you went into the, well, actually, this could also very well happen. I mean, given my perspective on this, I mean, given just the amount of people Ethiopia has, I believe it's the second most populous country in the region. Yes. And it's also, I believe, the most populated one, which is landlocked. And the fact that the country was never colonized and you guys have managed to maintain your culture and you have the sense of national unity, regardless of your ethnic differences, that already is a reason to hold on to the nation. And I really hope that national unity actually comes into fruition.
I say it is too big to fail, but
exactly.
Let's hope that it is too big to fail, and then we and also the leaders and the stakeholders will have a political will to make sure that the nation will.
But also circling to the international response, surely the domestic stakeholders should definitely have a louder say in this as well. But how can domestically this be solved as an entire debacle or chaos even if there's no international attention on it as well? So I really hope that this episode kind of serves as a starting point for the IIP to discuss issues more on the
Peace
region.
matters.
Peace matters.
Matters everywhere.
It's the title. It's
Peace matters
everywhere.
everywhere.
I agree with you,
Yeah.
Moges.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
It was a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sticking around to the very end. I really appreciate it. Please leave a like, subscribe, keep up with our content in the future, and until the next one, thank you.